think perhaps the most interesting change in market value from this update, Ewan, was Kylian Mbappe, who lost 20 million euros. He's no longer among the most valuable players in the world. His market value is now 180 million euros. And I think it's an interesting one, Ewan. I think I'd like your kind of not instant reaction because you've obviously known about it for a while now since you worked at transfer market, but a lot of people would say Mbappe is still the best player in the world, or arguably amongst the best players in the world. But his market value has dropped. I'll maybe go into explanation from our market value admin as to why that's the case in a moment. But first things first, nice to have you on the show, and let me know what you think of those new market values for Mbappe.
Yeah, I mean, when Mbappe's involved, it's always headline news, as we've seen this season at Madrid, both on and off the pitch. Your point about many view him as one of the best, if not the best players in the world, he is, in my opinion. I totally agree. I think he's a phenomenal player. You look at his market value, the reasons for it you're going to go into soon, but I mean, one of them is simply just age, and he is getting a little bit older. From my personal point of view, Madrid is almost unique in terms of the scrutiny you get as a Madrid player, the press attention, as we've seen over just the last week with the elections. It is almost like a circus at times, and it feels like Mbappe is taking a lot of the blame for that. But if you break it down and look at his numbers last season, 42 goals in 44 games, plus his 7 assists. So if you add that up, he's averaging a goal contribution more in every game. I would certainly argue that he is doing his job. It's the things around him which haven't been, functioning as well. You look at his record, he scored 15 goals in the Champions League. He was on track to equal the record set by Cristiano Ronaldo of 17. So he's doing it in the big games. He broke the Champions League away record for goals last season with 10, in just 4 games as well. He scored in both. I know Real Madrid went out of the Champions League against Bayern Munich, but he scored in both those games. He scored in the Clasico win over Barcelona, the biggest game in Spain, albeit he missed the second one. So I think if you look at it from an individual point of view, Mbappe is delivering the goods, and that's certainly been the case since he went to Real Madrid. The famous saying goes, finishing second is essentially still not good enough in Spain. That's the case with Barcelona dominant.
Yeah, that's the kind of really fascinating thing about it, isn't it? Is where does the kind of scrutiny of individual performance end, and where does the kind of overall kind of maybe reputation, or as you say, chaos surrounding Real Madrid kind of impact a player like Mbappe? I do have quotes. Obviously, Manu put together the market value update article for us, and Tobias Blaseo, who's in charge of our La Liga market values at Transfermarkt, is quoted in the piece. He says, Mbappe's individual class is obvious for everyone to see statistically as well. It was another strong season. So obviously touching on what you said there, Ewan, but he is one of the main protagonists within upheaval that has engulfed Real Madrid. He has won only 2 minor titles with the club, the UEFA Super Cup and the Super Cuppa. That's just not good enough given his high standards. He will also turn 28 at the end of the season. I think he means at the end of the year, which is when his market value category can be considered an advanced age. I want to touch on, we touched on obviously his age and the fact that he'll be 28 by the end of the year, but I want to kind of touch on what Tobias says in terms of the main protagonist within the upheaval that has engulfed Real Madrid. So he touched on, Florentino Perez and the kind of presidential election that's been happening in Real Madrid. And I found it quite striking that he and his challenger both spoke about the need to sign big players. And, you could obviously say that's just kind of politics. And I guess the easiest way to kind of win people over to voting for you if you're looking to be the president of Real Madrid is to just say, I'm going to go out and sign X, Y, and Z. But do you think it maybe speaks to the lack of impact Mbappe's had since he moved to Real Madrid, that there's still this kind of underlying need or urge to go out and buy what was, if I'm not mistaken, exclusively strikers or forwards that were linked with? They were linked with, off the top of my head, I think Harry Kane, Michael Olise was a big one this week as well. So obviously both of them, both from Bayern Munich. there was obviously I mean, I think we could say alleged tapping up of Erling Haaland, which obviously he, his father, and Manchester City all responded to and rejected quite forcefully. But if you wanted to be a little pernickety here, you could say, well, if Mbappe and Real Madrid were working, there wouldn't be a need to go out and court someone like Haaland or Harry Kane, would there?
Yeah, I suppose you can look at it two ways. I mean, going back to the original point about him being one of the main protagonists in the circus around Real Madrid. I mean, that's subjective ultimately. That view. You could look at it another way and say that a lot of the Madrid players weren't having Xavi Alonso's manager because he wanted them to put in more defensive work and kind of get rid of the sort of under Carlo Ancelotti, he was such a man manager. There was the players at Madrid were almost as powerful, if not more powerful, than the manager. And I think Alonso wanted to change that, which I, in my opinion, again, I think that's the right thing to do. And Mbappe was one of the players who didn't have a problem with Alonso. They famously got on really well. So from that point of view, you could argue that he wasn't one of the main protagonists. And the problem I think Madrid at the second half of the season is they brought in Arbeloa as the head coach, and he just wasn't good enough to be a head coach of Real Madrid. The thinking obviously behind it was he was a very popular player and he could bring harmony back to the dressing room, but you've also got to be a good coach, and I just don't think Arbeloa is of that level, and I think you've seen that play out across the end of the season. There's got to be criticism of Mbappe because he is a superstar player. He'll be the highest paid player at the football club, and we know how it works. You look at the dressing room there with Vinicius Jr. going into last year with his contract, and he wants parity with Mbappe's wages. I think when you look at Mbappe, he's always going to be linked with Vinny because when he came in, they both probably preferred playing off the left hand side. That's Mbappe's favourite position. He's moved more as a striker, so it's just getting the kind of parts around Mbappe, I think, to make this team successful. I don't think José Mourinho is going to come in this summer and go, do you know what? I don't want Mbappe. He's probably going to go. He's probably going to go. How can I get the players working around Mbappe to make him the star, and put more legs into the team? There's a real lack of running in Madrid off the ball. When they have the ball, it's not really a problem, but it's off the ball that tends to be the issue. And I think there is a legitimate concern or complaint about the Madrid side is the balance of the team, because if you've got Vinicius and Mbappe and perhaps they're not the best defensively, then that is an issue. And I think what works into that kind of narrative around Mbappe being maybe the main protagonist or the problem with Madrid is the fact that since he's left PSG went on and won 2 Champions Leagues because the team ethos is so much better.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing, and you could certainly touch on PSG winning the 2 Champions League, but also the manner in which they've won 2 Champions League. And that Luis Enrique has came in, had that kind of very famous clip of him talking about how Mbappe doesn't track back, doesn't do running off the ball, and he's kind of turned PSG into this kind of, well, all-conquering team, but they do so with that kind of really incredible capacity to kind of run teams off the pitch, but also there's no star player in that PSG team who can't be substituted off. Desiree Doué, Barcola, Kvaratskhelia. The team is full of world class players, but none of them are bigger than the squad. None of them are bigger than the system. You then look at La Liga and Real Madrid beaten in La Liga title this season by a Barcelona team who also play a very similar style, where Hansi Flick has Barcelona playing as very aggressive, I guess you'd call it gegenpressing, which he's always used at any level or any club he's coached that. But again, it's a team of very selfless world-class stars to an extent. So you draw those two comparisons to this Real Madrid team, as you said. Now, Real Madrid tried to do that with Xabi Alonso. It didn't work out. And now we've got José Mourinho coming in, which will either be a masterstroke or it'll be more petrol in the fire because, Mourinho is obviously famous for having his own system, having his own style, having his favourites, and making sure that any player that steps on the pitch only does so because they're playing the football that he wants to play. And as you said, Ewan, he has to kind of figure out a way to get that to work with the players that Real Madrid have, because Of course, it's not just the fact that Mbappe is at fault here. As you said, his individual stats are outstanding. He can rightfully look at that last season and say, well, everything I did, everything I was in charge of, I did well. I put the ball in the back of the net. But when you look at the kind of maybe imbalance of the way that they're trying to fit him and Vinicius Jr. into that team, maybe to a lesser extent, the way that Jude Bellingham went from being this very attack-minded, almost number 10, to having to sit back a bit because Mbappe came into that team. And even look at the kind of player that Mbappe replaced, which was Benzema, who obviously was an outstanding striker, but was also a player who could drop deep, who could set up other players, almost in a kind of very similar vein to how Harry Kane plays for Bayern Munich now. And I'm just fascinated by how how Mourinho is supposed to get all of this to work, because maybe I'm being cynical here, but I can't really envisage a situation where Mourinho turns that team of kind of world class players, but role it's star players and big personalities into this kind of selfless team of runners and players who are willing to work off the ball, because we just haven't seen that from Real Madrid this season.
Yeah, we certainly have to add in the transfer market. I mean, there is players at the club who I think can provide that energy and dynamism. And like, let's look at someone like Federico Valverde, for example. That's one of his best traits. But I completely agree. It's going to be a fascinating situation, because if Mourinho's asking Mbappe to track back the fullback, I don't think he's going to want to do that. So, what do you do? I think Mbappe will be a central striker again next season. And then can you maybe allow for him to, have less defensive responsibility? We have seen it at some of the best teams of our generation. Pep Guardiola, Messi under Pep Guardiola didn't really do anything off the ball. Cristiano Ronaldo under Manchester United, Sir Alex Ferguson famously played Ji-sung Park to basically do Ronaldo's running for him. So I think when a player is that good, which Mbappe unquestionably is, it's more about how do you get the team to function to support that quality. Because like you said, I mean, he is doing his job. He is putting the ball in the back of the net. It's about finding a formula to make the team more cohesive and work as a unit. And I think they'll have to do that in the transfer market, because I don't think they have the kind of squad composition at the moment to do that. And another big thing when we talk about Mbappe and Vinicius Jr. had a downgrade as well. I mean, he's in the last year of his contract.
Mm.
If he doesn't sign a new deal, there's no way Perez is going to let him run his deal down and go for a free. So they'll cash in this summer. So does that change the balance of the team if you maybe lose Vinicius? That you can maybe change how you set up and bring in some more hard-working players. It'll be a fascinating summer at Real Madrid.
Yeah, absolutely. Rodrigo too, of course, who kind of conveniently for Real Madrid kind of picked up an injury really and not had to be kind of shoehorned into that team the last 6 months, but he will of course be back after the summer. Now, before we kind of wrap this up, we do have to obviously touch on the World Cup, because, if Arbeloa or Xabi Alonso couldn't get the best out of Mbappe, then there is certainly one head coach who can and routinely does, and that is Didier Deschamps. And, he's obviously found a way to, in many ways, get a winning formula out of Mbappe in that French team. At this moment in time, at this moment in his career, Mbappe is 27 years old. End of the year is going to be 28. His market value has just dropped from 200 million to 180 million. Ewan, I guess the question is, do you think we've passed peak Mbappe here, or do you think he could potentially use this World Cup with France to kind of bounce back, prove himself and say, no, I'm still the best player in the world. I can still work in a functioning team, as I'll show with France and Deschamps. And it's not me, it's the problem, it's Real Madrid. And do you think he can do that and then obviously bounce back up towards the €200 million market value?
Yeah, I mean, I think he definitely can do that, and that's what the challenge would be for him this summer. If you look at his record in the World Cup's incredible. He was the first player in over 40 years to score a hat trick in a final. He's the real talisman for France, and like you mentioned, Deschamps makes it work around Mbappe. When they won it, he was incredible. His performance in the final against Argentina must go down as, I know he didn't win, but it must go down as one of the greatest individual performances in a World Cup, any game. It was phenomenal. So he does have that in him. He's a magical player. Going back to your first point, I think this is the peak Mbappe at the moment. I think the next 2 years will probably then move on, because he does rely a lot on pace. Um, So this is probably his peak at the moment, and I think he can go and have an incredible World Cup. France are probably amongst the favourites to win it. And the kind of subplot as well is Mbappe scored 12 goals in 14 games at the World Cup. The record for Miroslav Klose at the World Cup is 16. I think it's extremely feasible that Mbappe breaks Klose's World Cup record and becomes the leading scorer in history of the competition, because he needs 4 goals. There's more teams. The standard of the competition is less. Can you see Mbappe getting 4 goals if France get to the semi-final? You'd think he'd have to. So that could be a real big talking point, and then he can really cement his place as, for the record goal scorer in the World Cup of all time. Your numbers for your individual numbers are incredible. Then you've got to have been, your name's got to be mentioned in amongst the best players of his generation. It's just the
Yeah,
trophies. It's just the Champions League. It has. He just can't seem to win the Champions League. And the other point about Mourinho going there as well is he's not won a league title in 11 seasons. I think he obviously went invincible last season in Portugal, but he didn't win the league with Benfica. So there's that question mark around him. So Mbappe's probably thinking, well, people are asking, am I the problem at Madrid? But he's probably thinking, is Mourinho the right coach to sort this?
mm. Well, interesting enough, as you said, we could be entering a new season with Mbappe and France as world champions. And also, we did have Ivan Fuente from the Spanish team on recently. And before we knew Mourinho was going to be the new Real Madrid head coach, he did tip the Champs to potentially be a future Real Madrid head coach. So if things don't work out for Mourinho next season, we might see the Champs come in and say, and then that'll be the kind of final proof that, like, right, if anyone could get Mbappe to work at Real Madrid, it'll of course be the French head coach. But we'll cross that bridge when it comes, Ewan.